Hi everyone, welcome back to Lloyd Academy Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa Educational Program 2024. This is Shai from the Market Development Team for Lloyd's Asia, our platform in Singapore. Today's session will be a case study discussion on strikes, riots, and civil commotion. Before I pass the floor to our moderator and presenters, I would like to express our sincerest gratitude for everyone's presence today and for your participation in the past webinars. Your support means a lot to us, and we'd like to let you know that we're working on issuing your certificates, so please bear with us as we complete the process. Thank you. And of course, the session will be recorded and will be shared once available. Lastly, for me, the views and opinions of the speakers expressed in this webinar are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Lloyd's. The information provided is for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. With that, I will hand over the time to our moderator, Nicole Tan from MS Amlin, who is also the chairperson for the Political Violence and Terrorism Development Group at Lloyd's, to get us started. Nicole?
Hi everyone, I'm Nicole. Once again, thank you all for joining us today for this educational program. We're very pleased to have two very experienced professionals from McLaren's with us today who will be sharing with us case studies on claims in the region. Please allow me to introduce to you our speakers. Firstly, we've got Paul Fair, Technical Director, Korea, Regional Loss Adjuster. Paul entered the loss adjusting profession in 1993 and moved to Asia and joined McLaren's in 2007. Paul handles a wide range of insurance claims, specializing in property and casualty major loss, power and energy, engineering, product recall, and liability claims. He is also the managing adjuster for regional liability accounts. Next, we have Jenny Teo, Head of Forensic Accounting, Southeast Asia. Jenny has been involved in forensic accounting investigations since 2002. She has worked on numerous business interruption and fidelity losses of various scopes and sizes for lawyers and insurers in the Asia-Pacific region. Jenny is also regularly appointed on commercial litigation disputes, measuring economic losses, damages in breach of contract and fraud investigations, as well as analytical reviews of financial information, financial data mining, reconstruction of accounting records, and reconciliatory processes. Throughout this session, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. All right, without further delay, let's continue, and I will now hand the time over to Paul and Jenny for the presentation.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone's having a great day. And today we're honoured to be representing Lloyd's Academy to discuss the strikes, riot and civil commotion claims. Today we don't actually have a lot of time, so we are going to limit the presentation to the overview of 3 claims in Asia. Now, just before we crack on, just a brief overview of McLaren's. We provide a global network of technical specialists of all lines of insurance business. We're fast approaching our centennial, which is coming up shortly, and we service all continents, but predominantly in Asia, across from south in Australia and New Zealand, up to the north in South Korea and China. We are a multiple specialty discipline adjusting service, and we range from aviation to offshore power and energy, agriculture, crisis management, and cyber. And we've recent expansions of adjacency services such as forensic engineering and accountancy services. McLaren's do operate a global bespoke claim system to service regional and global markets to the highest technical and quantitative standards. So please feel free to review the website for capabilities in your respective markets if you need additional information. Today, I'm fortunate to be joined by my colleague, Jenny, Head of Forensic Accounting Southeast Asia, who's part of the adjusting team handling the large and complex losses regionally. Collectively, we have over 53 years of insurance experience, although clearly it looks more obvious on me than it does with Jenny. And we've seen a wide range of claims in the unique individual jurisdictions of Asia. the region with clearly the greatest exposure to natural catastrophes and the largest diversity of claims in the world. Whilst we could discuss a multitude of claim scenarios and the nuances of individual markets given the scope of our experience, today we're just focusing on SRCC and PV policies. Due to client confidentiality, we have redacted names, and we'll be discussing old claims, not current claims. We've included a strike loss, a terrorism claim, and a PV civil commotion loss. We will discuss the summary of the circumstances, the claim, and the policy response. And as already suggested, any questions you may have can be raised at the end of the presentation. So the first loss we're going to discuss today occurred in the Philippines, as it says there, in 2016, and is an unusual loss insofar as that it caused an unexpectedly long interruption to the business. So as some background, after commencing operations in the 1920s, this particular company moved to its large current production mill in the mid-60s. The company produces various hard fiber ropes using abaca, which is commonly known as Manila hemp, and creates large-sized plated synthetic ropes. Whilst primarily manufacturing the synthetic rope, the specialized hemp ropes are still used in the oil, construction, and marine industries and are highly valuable. The insured employs around 500 workers, with the majority from local labour cooperatives. It is important to note that the incoming abaca is inspected by qualified graders, as the hard fibre rope's quality is determined by the classification of the raw material for the respective production. So on this occasion, in May 2016, approximately 400 of the 500 workers, most who are mill operators, went on strike after talks to reach a collective bargaining agreement failed. The insured workers ejected the management and security and took occupancy of the site, barricading themselves inside. With most of the workers being from the local environment, their families could feed them, so they were able to occupy the site for many months, as we'll talk about shortly. The Department of Labour and Employment, or DOLE, ordered the management of the plant and the workers' unions to take no retaliatory action whilst negotiations continued. As a result, the police refused to get involved in the dispute. It took until September 2017 for the National Labour Relations Commission to issue an injunction ordering the strikers to leave the plant. So that's 16 months. The strikers refused to vacate, so the police were then forced to impose the injunction and eject them from the plant. The inspections began in mid-October, and it was soon identified that significant damage had been caused to the electrical systems, production equipment, and damage to the stock. In this case, actually, operations were only able to commence partially in February 2018. That's 21 months post-strike, and actually full resumption didn't return until over 2 years after the commencement of the strike. So the claim for property damage in this instance exceeded $1.5 million. Buildings, predominantly related to damage to the metal roof on the administration building and the manufacturing building, which had had numerous hard objects and people walking across the top of the roof surface, causing holes to be punched through the roof, and roof panels had been lifted and forced open, enabling rainwater to ingress into the offices and damage the production equipment. Offices had been broken into, and office equipment and computers had been stolen, and cabinets were damaged where documents were obtained and removed. Machinery and equipment was damaged by the strikers, including the transformers in the substation, where the breakers and the buzz bars, etc., and those items with copper parts particularly, had been removed and stolen. Production machine parts had also been stolen and vandalized. And importantly, in this instance, the stock, so the raw material, WIP and finished goods, equated to over 50% of the claim, had been damaged. Approximately 60% of the raw materials, in this case the abaca, was low-grade material, which due to the prolonged period of storage and the failure of the environmental systems, had degraded to such a degree that it would have been rendered a total loss. The high grade, so that's 40%, high grade material, that had degraded to such a degree that it could classify as low grade and could still be used, but on much significantly lower strength ropes. The insured submitted the claim for the respective variance between the high and low grade and the total loss of the low grade material, raw material, the work in progress, which had just degraded on the production line, and in respect of the finished goods, whilst the synthetic rope hadn't degraded to such a significant degree, all of the hard fiber rope had failed, and because of the nature of the ordering and was bespoke to each individual client, the clients no longer wanted the rope because of the delays, so all the finished goods had been effectively written off of the hard fiber material. So the loss occurred during the policy period at the insured location, and the insured satisfied the obligations for replacement valuations by having submitted a valuation report. So we were happy that the sum insured were for the respective items, and there were numerously individualized heads of lines of cover, and they were all adequately insured. There was no doubt that damage to the insured property had been caused by the workers on strike. The riot and strike extension definition was for loss or damage to the property insured directly caused by the act of any person taking part, together with others, in any disturbance of the public peace, whether in condition with a strike or lockdown or not, other than condition 6. And in this case, condition 6 was excluding losses following an uprising, so that wasn't applicable. The riot and strike cover in this instance was extended by a malicious damage extension, which covered the loss or damage to property insured directly by a malicious act of any person. However, any loss or damage arising out of or in the course of burglary, housebreaking, theft, or larceny of any attempt thereof of any person taking part was excluded. So the insurer, with our assistance, obtained a legal opinion on policy response, specifically in relation to the theft of items under the malicious damage extension. And that concluded and was agreed that items would be excluded if stolen. And in this instance, that equated to 60% of the property claim and nearly 90% of the machinery claim. In respect of Section 2, which only responds following a fire, Condition 5 of the strike and riot extension excludes loss of earnings, loss by delay, loss of market, or other consequential or indirect loss whatsoever. So in this case, the stock claim was excluded where it was stolen or had degraded. Now, taking into consideration the numerous challenges faced by the insured to verify the claim because of the loss of documents, the loss of computer systems, and the inability to have backup, which obviously was all on site, combined with the eventual policy response, there's no, obviously, the policy decision meant there was a dispute. The insured rejected the proposed adjustments and threatened legal proceedings. There was a period of 2 years of ongoing negotiations and mediation to try and avoid litigation, and eventually, after 4 years, this claim was settled at around about 20% of the submitted claim. So a lot of impact on the policy and how it affected the adjustment in this instance. So, I mean, that was a simple strike that effectively continued for such a prolonged period of time that the policy became very, very impactful on the adjustment. Now, moving on, the next claim relates to a terrorist attack. And this follows the devastating attacks on the Sunday, the 21st of April, 2019, when 3 churches and 3 luxury hotels in Colombo in Sri Lanka were targeted during a number of coordinated ISIS-related terrorist suicide bombings. Unfortunately, these attacks killed at least 290 people and wounded over 500. The Sri Lankan government declared a state of emergency from midnight 22nd of April under the Public Security Ordinance, and that gave the police and the government and armed forces the powers to undertake counter-terrorism activities, and those activities remained in place until the 25th of August 2019. So in this instance, the insured was an operator of 2 spas, one of which was located in a detached building in a compound occupied by one of the attacked hotels, unfortunately only 50 meters from the explosion. The insured leased the majority of a second floor of a detached 2-story commercial building, was constructed of reinforced concrete with a car park in the basement that could be accessed directly from the main public highway that ran adjacent to the building, and the main hotel entrance, which is again just near the reception area, 50 meters away. The spa, typical of spa design, had a reception area, 10 treatment rooms, steam, sauna, and foot massage area. The spa specialized with Nepalese and Thai massage and operated from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The insured predominantly generated income from the guest bookings from the hotel. These bookings were generally telephoned through to confirm availability, or guests accessed the spa directly from one of the 2 entrances. Immediately following the blast, the guests and staff were evacuated so that medical and security measures could be implemented, and the insured expatriated the majority of the staff due to the safety concerns. So in this instance, the terrorists had gained access to the hotel pretending to be guests, and the blast occurred around 9:15 a.m. when the hotel guests were at breakfast. The spa building was not materially damaged, and there was no damage to the insured's leasehold improvements nor assets within the spa. The army was mobilized to provide armed security and protection to the affected hotel, and the site was cordoned off to enable the criminal examination of the scene and undertake damage assessments. With the hotel closed, all access gates to the site were locked, and the metal gates, so there was no pedestrian access, and all visitors were required to use the single entrance security checkpoint, which was manned by the army, and full credentials were required to be provided for any visitors. They needed to provide their details in advance, and they would then be checked against the records by the security personnel before gaining access. Vehicles were comprehensively searched before accessing the site, and these were initiated within days of the blast. Now, in this instance, there was no physical damage to the assets, but the insured prepared a financial loss claim for the loss of attraction, combined with the denial of access and security issues preventing access to the hotel complex. The loss period was considered to be from the date of the explosion until at least August 2019, when the state of emergency ceased. The policy would indemnify the insured for loss of or damage to resulting from an act or series of acts of political violence, as described in the policy wording, following the acts of terrorism, and in this case, the clause was clearly terrorism and confirmed to be an insured peril. Now, Jenny, if you can just cover the business interruption elements.
Right, yes, good afternoon. So in terms of business interruptions, the loss did occur at an insured location during the policy period. Although the claim itself, uh, Paul, you have your Yes, sorry. So although the insured claimed for a loss of attractions, there was actually no loss of attraction extension in the policy for this particular insured location, but there was a prevention of access extensions. So the typical cover for prevention of access states that insurers shall pay for the actual loss sustained by the insured, as well as any incremental costs that the insured may incur in order to mitigate their loss, but must also deduct for any expenses that they are saved. There are three key conditions that must be fulfilled in order for a loss to be indemnifiable. The first thing is it must be caused, the prevention of access itself must be caused by a physical loss or damage to a property within a radius of 2 kilometers. In this case, the hotel was actually located within 50 meters from the spa and therefore fulfills the first conditions. For the second conditions, the prevention of access must result in a necessary interruption to the business of the insured. From our investigations, and as what Paul has earlier mentioned, the insured actually expatriated most of the employees immediately following the attack for safety reasons. So what this means is that the spa itself could not operate even if the guests had access. So therefore, we found that the shortfall in terms of revenue is result of a shortage of staff rather than a prevention of access. And lastly, any indemnifiable loss must be subject to the waiting period and sublimit. In this case, the indemnity period was a major point of dispute because the insured actually claims for a interruption period until August 2019 until the state of emergency was rescinded. However, our research shows that number one, the hotel was actually reopened on 30th of April, so that is about 9 days after the attack. And in the first week alone, after the hotel was opened, more than 2,000 guests has actually visited the hotel for the restaurants and everything, and therefore guests were actually entering the complex and the premises. So, and there was actually no evidence that the security measures prevented access because the customers could access the hotels and members of the public was also able to access the site. So it was we concluded that there was only a denial of access for about 9 days, which is way below the 21 days waiting period. As a result, the claim itself was denied. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Jenny. So swiftly moving on, obviously we've now covered a strike, we've now covered a political violence attack, and here we have a civil commotion combined with PV. The final claim is a claim evolving from the Hong Kong riots. Now, for background, I'm sure we're all very familiar with this. The 2019 to 2020 Hong Kong protests was a series of demonstrations against the government's introduction of a bill to amend the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance that would have allowed the transfer of fugitives to mainland China, amongst other jurisdictions. The protests escalated following a sit-in at the government headquarters in March 2019 and the subsequent demonstration of the suspension of the bill in June. The protests escalated between July and October 2019, becoming violent with attacks on the police and the sieges of the Chinese University and the Polytechnic University. So in this instance, the insured is the owner of the of a mall that was purchased in 2011, which is at that time the world's largest retail deal of approximately 2.4 billion, for the occupancy of 1 million square foot of floor space, with 580,000 square foot of lettable space over 7 floors, with parking for over 800 plus vehicles in the basement floors below. The mall has 220 retail outlets and facilities including cinemas and F&B areas. There is an adjoining office building, as is typical of most malls in Hong Kong, and it's located adjacent to the MTR, which is the mass transit railway that provides a constant flow of foot traffic into the mall. So the chronology is that from Monday, the 11th of November 2019, a small group of black-clad people began to damage external glass panels around 9:40 a.m. The mall remained open, but the trouble escalated when an attack of a group of masked protesters threw a petrol bomb at the large Christmas tree inside the mall in the early evening. It was obviously coming on the lead up to Christmas, so they had a very large Christmas tree in the atrium. The mall was closed at around 7 p.m, but shortly thereafter, a group broke the glass doors and entered the building and again set fire to the Christmas tree, which caused the sprinkler system to operate. The masked people then rampaged through the mall, smashing the glass panels on a glass wall and all the glass balustrades throughout the mall and the escalators. The mall was attacked on 5 different occasions during the day, and the police notified on each occasion. Unfortunately, due to the resource limitations, because the police were attending numerous riots that day, the police could not attend immediately. The following day, on the 12th of November, the insured closed the mall since they received internet warnings of further possible attacks. The building was locked down with as much temporary protection as they could erect in such a short period of time, but unfortunately in the evening, protesters broke through the glass doors and once again started throwing petrol bombs. The fire were extinguished by the mall staff who remained and the activation of the sprinkler systems. Another mob smashed the ground floor glass doors, and they again petrol bombed the Christmas tree, which wasn't having much luck. The fire brigade did attend, obviously had to have armed guard whilst they attended and tried to fight the fire, and they were successful at doing so. They retreated from the mall, and again in the evening it was continually attacked with mobs breaking in the various doors and then gaining access inside, throwing petrol bombs, causing minor fires, and vandalizing extensively the interior of the mall. Each time the riot police attended on the second day, they searched for intruders, confirmed it was clear, retreated, and the protesters would strike again, throwing petrol bombs, causing more internal damage, and that continued. On the 13th of November, the mall was closed due to the extensive damage and to the common areas and the health and safety concerns. Staff were posted, or security staff were contracted to try and guard the doors and prevent entry, whilst metal shutters were swiftly erected. Again, the mall was attacked by protesters and the balustrades again smashed. The police and the insured received continual warnings of attacks, and eventually the insured was forced to send all staff home. The mall was effectively then closed from the 14th completely. Thereafter, contracted security and riot police patrolled the area to try and prevent attacks, and they were reasonably successful. Inspections commenced, and contractors were appointed to quote for repairs, and that process took pretty much most of November into December, when repairs were fast-tracked. And with all due credit to the insured, they were able to reopen the mall mid-January. So there was interruption period, it was over 2 months. So the external damage was predominantly related to the external glass paneling. to such a degree that this was well in excess of $1 million. Quantity surveyors were appointed and contractors scoped all the repairs so we could quantify the loss and value. There were changes necessary to the external curtain wall design to provide greater security protection and remove the lower level glass panels, which are actually very cost effective and obviously mutually beneficial to both the insurers and the insured. The exterior work was not on the critical path to recovery, so did not predominantly affect the resumption of operations. However, it was necessary to modify metal hoardings on the outside to facilitate access for the reopening of the mall and enlarge openings to meet the health and safety requirements imposed by the building department. Replacement glass doors were temporarily installed pending the construction of the replacement items, which took a month and a half to complete. Unfortunately, it was the interior damage that took the brunt of it. The reinstate of the damaged balustrades and escalators was the critical path to restoring business operations. The design imposed by the building department required approval, and there were revisions were needed to change the design because of the period since its construction back in 1998, the construction of the balustrade, that is. So architects were required to create a design, submit that for approval, which is a lengthy process, but to all credit to building department, they were able to expedite the process of review and approval. And with the assistance of the consultants, it was agreed that there would be an acceptable alternative to meet the building requirements, the current health and safety regulations, and not affect the design too much, as only 75% of the balustrades were smashed and some of them remained. So they needed to try and be consistent for design to maintain the attraction and appeal of the mall. So as we said, in the early 3 days, the insured fought vigorously to try and erect temporary hoardings to minimize the assault on the building. They weren't really successful for those 3 days due to the number of protesters and the method and severity of the attack. But after the first 3 days, they were able to cover pretty much the ground floor and all building access points with metal hoardings to manage the access to the mall. And obviously had to comply with health and safety requirements when doing so, and obviously try and obtain contractors' materials, which were obviously in very high demand at that time due to the extensive activity of the protesters. Now, this is a terrorism policy with a named insured at an insured location. Terrorism covered section 1 and 2, so obviously covered the BI element. There was also property damage covering riot, strike, and civil commotion with malicious damage extensions, but that only covered section 1. There was quite extensive policy coverage in respect of this insured, with high sums insured, adequate for the operation, with 21 days BI waiting period, which obviously was extensively burned through the 66 days of interruption. Now we should all be fairly familiar with the policy definitions of terrorism, malicious damage, and occurrence. And in this case, it was quite pertinent to the claim, particularly the occurrence wording in relation to the 72 hours clause, where we had 3 days of extensive attack, and then obviously we had lengthy periods thereafter. But in this case, the predominant assaults occurred within those 72 hours. There was no material impact on policy response. Now, as you can imagine, a mall has, notwithstanding the material damage claim, had extensive business interruption losses, of which Jenny can cover now.
Yes. So in terms of the interruption period, we actually accepted that the insured complied with their due diligence obligations to restore the business to normal operational status quickly, but we actually maintained that the indemnity period ended no later than 31st of March 2020, when the mall was largely back to normal. Although by then, business was actually impacted more by COVID-19 rather than anything else. So by 31st of March 2020 is when we concluded that the results of the business by then had been ceased to be affected as a consequence of the physical damage. Again, the cover for BI, this is the typical cover for BI where insurers will actually be liable for number one, actual loss sustained, as well as any incremental costs that may be incurred in order to mitigate their loss, but also deduct for expenses that may be saved. In terms of actual loss sustained, we are not going into the mechanics of that. But in general, what this means is that we look at what are the revenues and profits that the insured would have earned, but for the incident, and we compare that against the actual revenues or the profits that the insured was able to earn during the interruption period. Again, there are three conditions. It must be caused by physical loss or damage to the property, which resulted in the necessary interruption to the business. And importantly, is actually subject to the adequacy of the sum insured. For example, if the sum insured is for $1 million, but we found, sorry, Paul back first. Yeah, sorry. So, for example, if the sum insured was actually for $1 million, but we found that the insured would have earned, say, 1.25 million, what this means is that the insured will be inadequately insured by 250,000 or 20%. Therefore, any indemnifiable loss would be proportionally reduced by 20%. So that is what we meant by the adequacy of sum insured. In this particular case, there are quite a number of interesting BI claim elements that we can discuss. Of course, for a mall of this size, the loss of rental incomes is substantial. The mall was able to continue to earn rental income from the office tenants, but for the retail tenants, they were actually waived by contract, meaning that if something were to happen, they do not need to pay rent. So there's a clear loss of rental from retail tenants, and that includes both fixed monthly rental as well as variable rents based on turnover. So for this, we have quite a number of adjustments. Number one, we found that the retail sales at the mall, or in fact in general in Hong Kong at that time, had been declining in the months leading up to the incident, mainly because of the protests in the months before the incident. What this means is that the expected variable rents from turnover sales would have been lower in any event, whereas the insured's claim was actually prepared based on a pre-loss average of rental income that they expect to earn. There were also rent discounts of 20 to 30% that were granted to some tenants before the incident. And the insured actually claimed that these tenants would have ceased by December 2019. But we actually found that since the retail sales around at the mall was already declining in the months leading up to the incident, we concluded that these discounts would have likely continued into 2020, at least for January, if not for the even if the incident did not happen. So we adjusted the expected revenues for that. There was also an ice rink within the mall itself that we found took a much longer time to return to pre-loss normal sales level after the mall has reopened. But from our investigations, we concluded that the lower footfall at the ice rink was likely due to the COVID-19 restriction measures rather than anything to do with the incident. So again, there were negotiations on that matter. Um, there were also, in addition to the abatement of rent, the insured has also agreed to offer rebates in rent. Paul, next, please. Yes. So there were also rebates in rent that was offered to tenants during the closure period. Number one, to secure their continued loyalty or to dissuade the tenants from breaking their leases, forfeiting their deposits, and leaving the mall. So the insured actually alleged that these reliefs and discounts were given to ensure that the tenants will stay when the mall has reopened. Otherwise, alleged that the tenants may terminate their lease and a more material BI claim would have resulted. While we recognize that some rental rebates or relief or discounts may be justifiable, we adjusted for market trend, COVID-19, and the latest market rent statistics in order to determine what is the expected um, fair rental rebates or relief that may be granted. There were also some tenants that actually renegotiated the terms to their tenancy agreements, and this resulted in the lower rent that was being collected over the entire maximum indemnity period of 2 years. Again, the insured alleged that these renegotiated tenancy agreements were related to the incident, and it was necessary to provide the lower rental rates in order to secure the tenant when they were doing the renewal during the closure periods. However, from our review of the various email correspondence between the insured and the tenants, we found that there were a variety of other reasons that the rates were being renegotiated. So again, the disputed items relating to compensation to tenants as well as the rental reductions was subjected to a negotiated settlement. The insured also incurred quite a number of additional costs in order to reopen them more quickly or to resume their business as fast as possible. Security expenses was incurred in order to protect the mall, which was deemed necessarily incurred post-damage to facilitate the immediate repair. However, once the repairs were done, the continuing security expenses was found to be not reasonable. Again, the insured also incurred hired PR consultants in order to manage the public expectations, perceptions of the attack, and also organize promotional activities after the mall was reopened to stimulate business. While there was no method to measure the efficacy of PR service in reducing the loss, the attack on the mall itself was actually widely reported in the press. So the engagement of professional guidance to restore calm and normality was therefore not unreasonable and was actually a bona fide step aimed at protecting the rental revenue as well as to restore the business as quickly as possible. Therefore, this was actually found to be reasonable. Same goes to the promotion, marketing, and advertisement expenses that was incurred post-opening. However, the insured also claims that their auditors, external auditors, actually charged them a higher audit fees after the loss because supposedly they had to do more work. However, as audit costs do not warrant for considerations under a BI cover, this element of the claim was actually excluded. Lastly, the insured also incurred temporary expenses in order to expedite repairs so that they can open the mall in time for the Chinese New Year peak trading period. Sorry, Paul, next, please. Yes. So this, sorry, the last slide. Yes. Sorry. So these temporary
I don't want it to
expenses.
end.
Anyway, the temporary expenses in the end we found to be fully justified and reasonably incurred for the sole purpose of reducing the loss. So again, that was actually allowed in the claim. So with that, we come to the end of our presentations. Happy to take any questions.
Well, I think just in summary, I think it's very clear that with these three examples that the policy wording was critical when assessing the claim and had a significant impact on the eventual settlement. Claims in Asia are often extreme, and these claims do illustrate the variety that we encounter. And obviously, noting the news in the UK, we trust that those handling the civil commotion claims are going to be able to satisfy the FSA instruction to settle these claims promptly, where clearly in our instances these claims went on for some time. So if you have any specific questions about these losses or claims in general, please let us know.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jenny. So I think for the audience, if you've got any questions, feel free to just type them in the chat box. Meanwhile, we've got a few questions here for both Paul and Jenny. I think the first question here would be on the Hong Kong loss. Did both the property and tourism market pay for the loss?
There was, yes, there was a mutual contribution on this one. Yeah, claims were implemented under both policies. But
Was there
obviously, we
like a
know
percentage?
we won't go into the complexities of that allocation, but it was obviously clear that under the one policy only covered section 1 and one policy covered section 2. In this case, it was the section 2 that was the considerable value element of the loss, given the fact that the mall had such large foot traffic and such a large number of leaseholders or tenants in this case.
All right, thank you. The next question I think might be more for Jenny. Which BI extensions resulted in the highest payouts by the insurers?
I think in general, most of the extensions, prevention of access is one, additional increased cost of working is another, loss of attraction is another thing. So when it comes to PV or SRCC claims, these are the few key extensions that come into play. And whether it hits its full sublimit, I think it depends, number one, whether the insured was also adequately insured, and how that plays into the sublimit.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think as a common, sorry, I was just going to say, as a common kind of denominator, certainly in Asia, we find that where PV policies are incepted, that there has been quite considerable work on the part of the underwriter and the broker to ensure that the sums insured are adequate. I mean, I'm not sure. That would be an interesting question, globally, as to whether there is a variance and an adequacy of some insured between various jurisdictions. Maybe we could have that as a separate topic in future. The trends of underwriting.
Okay, thank you. We've got one question in the chat box. So, so in relation to the civil commotion loss, do the loss adjusters actually go down to the affected place, or do they assess the loss remotely? And also, how easy is it for the loss adjuster to assess the affected place, or go on the ground for the assessment?
Well, I think if I answer that one, obviously during the 3 days of extensive attacking of the mall, we didn't attend on those. Obviously, given the fact that we were warned not to attend, and anybody who was in that area was deemed to be a protester, and then subject to potential arrest if there. So shortly thereafter, I mean, it was clear that with the cooperation of the authorities that we were able to gain access and contractors were able to gain access. So we didn't need to go incognito in any way after the first attacks, if you like, and multiple meetings there after the fourth day onwards, I think. So yeah, no, but obviously with all industries, health and safety requirements have to take precedent. We would only go to an area where it's safe to do so.
All right, thank you. All right, we've got one question on the Hong Kong mall loss. So, did the ground floor suffer the bulk of the damage, or were all the floors of the mall equally targeted?
The ground floor was the most heavily damaged because that's where they could access, and that's where they could force entry, throw their fire bombs, and then flee. The Christmas tree was in that area, and that hit most of the fire damage. The main structural or the main material damage claim element was the balustrades, and they were on the 7 floors, so they were able to access all the 7 floors to smash those. So yes, for fire damage, for the most costly material damage elements, no, they were across all floors. But these are big shopping malls. There's only so many security people in there, and you've got lots of people attacking it. It's very easy to cause significant damage, and they were doing repeated attacks.
Right, thank you. And then again on that mall, through your investigations, was there any particular reason why that mall was targeted? Like, could it be due to ownership or was it just location?
No,
Or just
go on, Jenny. Do you want to have a go at
Yeah,
that?
so the mall in itself is not majority Chinese owned, number one. I think it was targeted mainly because it was actually very near to the two universities that the protesters were kind of coming from. So I think that is actually the key reason why the mall was kind of like bear brunt of it in that sense.
Yeah, and there were other malls that were also significantly attacked. You know, the main center of violence, if you like, was around the new Kowloon area. This is the North Kowloon, but there were many areas in west and east that also were attacked significantly. You know, I think that the nature of Hong Kong's commercial districts, then many units were attacked. You know, these are ground floor units, predominantly above residential areas, residential buildings. They were also attacked, but it's just one or two units at a time rather than malls. But there were certainly more than one mall attacked.
In fact, there were also damage to certain facilities within the universities. There was also so-called form part of some of the claims that we have seen during that time.
Yeah.
right. Thank you. I think you guys also mentioned that, handling and resolving a claim took a long time. Is there any good practice guidance to policyholders on, how to handle this to avoid any like delays?
Well, I think it's good practice for business to review their business continuity plans to ensure that they have proactive communications with contractors to draw up approved contractors lists, so that when they have need for consultants or immediate repairs, that they have already gone through the authorization process. For many large corporates, without this, it sometimes slows the demand. And if you already have an existing cooperation with a contractor, you're able to get that work done. The problem we had, not particularly with this claim, but for many other claims, is that there are only so many contractors, and with such a huge demand, unfortunately, they're able to select their clients, and it's those clients that they have a connection with are the ones that got the first dib. So business continuity plan reviews, pre-loss planning, if possible, in an ideal world, would have claims handling agreements, would have brokers reviewing pre-loss documentation submissions, to facilitate the quick submission.
All right, thank you. We've got another question on the loss of attraction extension. Are you able to give some clarification on how the loss will be assessed and quantified for that specific extension?
Jenny?
I think if the loss of attractions extension was actually covered, then the question is, but for the event, what would the revenue be like? But for the particular incident, so it's a little bit different from prevention of access because the underwriting driver was different. But if a loss of attractions cover was allowed, let's say it's like some of the COVID-19 cases that we have seen. So if nothing had happened, would this particular restaurant or this particular spa still attract the same level of business? So that will be our expected revenue there. And therefore, then we can compare to actual revenue. But again, this loss of traction must still result in the necessary interruption to the business. So for this particular spa, they are still affected by the fact that they has a shortage of staff. So even if we were to calculate something, the expected revenues that we will be calculating would be a lot lower for the fact that they have a much smaller staff force at that time in order to service the guests. So yes, there probably would have been a calculations for BI loss, but the loss would still have been substantially smaller. I hope that answers Janita's questions.
All right, thank you. We've got one last question here. I think it's really like relating to like the policy wordings. So In your experience, what would you say is the key determinant to conclude if a claim falls within a PB terrorism policy or, an SRCC policy?
Well, in most instances, it's what is depicted by the government authorities as to the cause. There has to be a mutual agreement between the respective stakeholders as to what the cause is, to then determine which policy applies and the extensions that apply. In this case, in all the three cases, it was the government's decision as to or determining decision on cause, which was accepted by all parties. I think in most cases, I think maybe if we look at the UK one, that would be an interesting one to see whether or not there is a PV element to there. Most PV policies do require there to be a connection to a terrorism activity, and then or defined to be associated with a specific organization. And in most cases, it's only the authorities who can make that determination. I haven't heard of one instance where local insurers or reinsurers have countered the root cause given by an authoritative party.
Also something to share. I was in Hong Kong in January 2020 before COVID happens, and we had meetings, discussions about the unrest in that sense. So I remember at that time, some insurers were actually still debating what to call it. Whether to call it a political violence, to call it terrorism, or call it a civil commotion. So some of the presentations that we were giving, they're saying that please don't call it a political violence incident or terrorism incidents at that time, because they haven't decided what to place the laws under. So they call it a civil unrest. So that it doesn't fall under any particular bulk or extension basket, because there were disputes as to what to call it. But it's in the very preliminary stages, just post November, December 2019. But that was something interesting.
Yeah, I think there was numerous legal opinions on that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jenny. I think we still have quite a few, just 1 to 2 questions in the chat box. I think we will address them offline and go to the audience directly on that site. I think we'll just hand our time back to Shai.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Jenny and Paul. So I understand we have some questions left, but we are happy to reach out back to you separately and answer the questions. And with that, I believe we have come to the end of the session. I would like to thank once again our esteemed speakers today, Paul and Jenny from McLaren's, for sharing your valuable insights and expertise with us, which we have learned a lot from, especially giving us those great examples on claims. And of course, thank you, Nicole, for your support being today's moderator. And lastly, thank you everyone for the fantastic level of engagement and for the past webinars that you have also participated at. We look forward to seeing you all on Thursday on the topic of fraud and claims, the last year in review, same time on Thursday, 15 August. And at this point, I will be sharing my screen now for the QR code for the feedback. Thank you once again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.